Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's panel on innovation for clean air. My name is Sarah Vogel. I'm the Vice President for Health at the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm really pleased to join this really important 50th anniversary event for the Clean Air Act, and I just want to thank all of the sponsors and for everyone joining us today. We just had a fabulous opening panel. I hope many of you were attending that. They laid out a lot of how the Clean Air Act has helped deliver cleaner air and significant health protections for millions of Americans, but those benefits have not been shared equitably. So we're going to talk today about the role of innovation in clean air as we look to transform the Clean Air Act, we hope, to deliver equitable protections for those communities of color disproportionately impacted by pollution and aggressively take steps to reduce our use and dependency on fossil fuels if we are to deliver clean air for all and a stable climate. One feature of the statute that has been critical in helping to deliver cleaner air has been the role of technology forcing regulations that have served to push or accelerate the development and investments in innovative technologies that have driven down emissions. So we're going to talk about some of that past role of these technology forcing regulations, and also look ahead at how we can be innovating, again, to deliver cleaner air and justice for all. EDF, an organization I work at, has been working at this intersection of innovation and clean air policy in the US for a long time. More recently, we've been working to harness new technologies in innovations in air quality monitoring and modeling to better understand pollution within cities at a much finer scale as compared to the regulatory monitor networks, as was mentioned in the last panel. Networks, of course, that have been essential in helping drive down regional air pollution, but that are missing these hot spots of pollution often occurring within cities. So if we're going to protect communities experiencing that disproportionate impact of air pollution, we need to understand pollution at the local scale. And some of the new sensing technologies are allowing us to measure pollution at that hyper-local scale, literally the block level. Vicki Patton mentioned some of this on the last panel. We started doing some of this work with a number of partners in Oakland, California, where we measured pollution using Google Street View cards mounted with air quality sensors, and found that pollution can vary up to 8 times within a single block. And then we collaborated with West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, a leading environmental justice organization in West Oakland, who then used this research to help develop the state's first community air pollution reduction plan. This plan was part of the California Air Resources Board Community Air Protection Plan that was created under AB 617, which was mentioned in the previous panel as well. And the aim of AB 617 is to reduce those disparities in air pollution across California experienced by environmental justice communities. So AB 617 is an innovative policy approach to address these environmental health disparities and is being supported by new advances and innovations in air pollution monitoring. So this is another aspect of innovation and clean air that we can weave into our discussion today. We have a great panel to help us delve into these issues of innovation in clean air. You have their bios, so I'm just going to introduce all of them. We are missing one of our panelists, so I'm going to introduce everybody and hope that we are a full team shortly. But we have David Hawkins, the former Assistant Administrator of Air, Noise, and Radiation at EPA. Margo O, who's the former Director of Office of Transportation and Air Quality at EPA. Tim Johnson, the Director for Emerging Regulations and Technologies at Corning Environmental Technologies. And Tommy Wells, the Director at the Department of Energy and Environment in the District of Columbia. So David, I would love to have you lead off this panel discussion and provide some reflections on the role of innovation in clean air.
Well, great. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks to the Lung Association and others for organizing this celebration. I looked at the attendees, the participants, and it's a wonderful group of people, many clean air heroes and heroines that have tuned in, and a big shout out to all of you. You know, for me, it's a fairly straightforward proposition about innovation. Innovation is all about markets. Ideas are cheap, but products are not. Innovators need to know there are customers out there for the things they want to innovate. Well, the Clean Air Act standards creates customers, namely the owners and operators of pollution sources. The foundation of most Clean Air Act standards is technology that someone has already invented. But critically, the rules themselves are performance standards. You have to meet a limit using whatever technology works. And that is what drives the impetus for technology innovation. Because when a standard is set, innovators know there will be customers for cheaper and better performing versions of the original technology. So, for example, the Clean Air Act in 1970 set tailpipe performance standards, and companies like Corning and Johnson Matthey got to work improving catalysts that already existed, but those catalysts in 1970 didn't work on vehicles and they weren't durable. But they got to work and did the innovation that was required because they knew the standards were going to require the use of these products, and they could make money off of investing in those improvements. The Clean Air Act in 1970 also directed EPA to set standards for key pollutants from big source categories like power plants. And also critically, the act used language that allowed EPA to assume improved performance of current technology when it was setting the standards. So these became stretch standards, technology forcing standards. In 1971, when EPA set the first SO2 standards for power plants, scrubbers were almost non-existent, and the ones that did exist were poor performance. But EPA set standards and the scrubbers got better and better. Another key innovation in the Clean Air Act is case-by-case permitting with a requirement for an updated assessment of best technology. The permitting programs require limits that are based on what is the current best performing technology, not technology that is 5 or 6 years old. And what this does is the process ratchets up innovation even faster than the infrequent national standards. There's another dynamic that's important to point out, which is in the standard setting process, the national standard setting process, the regulated industry typically wants that process to go on as long as possible, and they hire lawyers and lobbyists to just prolong the standard setting process and try to make it as weak as possible. In the permitting process, the shoe is on the other foot. Industry wants a decision quickly, and in order to get a quick decision, it will often agree to technology which it would not have argued was available in a national standard setting process. So this is a very important tool in the Clean Air Act. Let me, before stopping, just quickly mention a couple of other ways to create markets for innovation. Renewable portfolio standards are a successful way of doing it. Those are standards, as their name suggests. And then there is the whole class of subsidies, tax credits and other subsidies. Those can work all right, but they work better when they are accompanied by standards. And finally, there are some tools that don't work very well at all. For example, one-off grants to support research projects like the so-called Clean Coal program run by the Department of Energy. More often than not, these grants have wasted money because by themselves, they don't create a market. Another plus for standards compared to subsidies is they internalize the cost of the dirty fuels and processes. So that improves the economics of using cleaner alternatives like wind and solar, creating larger markets for those alternatives than a subsidy alone would create. I'll stop there, Sarah, and look forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you, David. That was a great overview of the role of how the Clean Air Act has generated these markets, as you're saying. Margo, I think you've joined us. I'm hoping you can build on what David's outlined and then provide a broader context for how you've seen the Clean Air Act using innovation to better protect health and some of those big challenges ahead as we're dealing with the disproportionate benefits of the Clean Air Act.
Good morning. Actually, greetings to all of you. I'm in California this morning. Thank you for joining us. It's wonderful in the midst of the pandemic, wildfires, loss of lives and economic losses to gather today to celebrate the 50 years of the Clean Air Act and the amazing road towards cleaner air. So thank you to the American Lung Association, to the American University, and all the ones that help us gather here today to celebrate the amazing implementation of the Clean Air Act. As David said, implementing the Clean Air Act not only has saved lives, but also in protect the environment. But there is a long history as how regulatory policies created innovation and economic benefits, from catalytic converters to onboard computers. Actually, the first computer that got into a car was for regulatory purposes, to the first electric car introduced in the 90s. So the results have been cleaner air, more durable and more fuel efficient cars, along with the creation of innovations and jobs. I want to share with you a statement by Tom Lindenberger. He is the CEO of Cummins, a major diesel engine company. When I was interviewing him for my book, he rejected the notion that innovation happens when government stays out of the way. That's what we're hearing a lot of times. Let us do it on a voluntary basis. What Tom said is that meeting EPA standards throughout the decades has helped them innovate, be ahead of the competition, and grow both domestically and the overseas markets. Since I spent 20 years almost managing the Office of Transportation and Air Quality, I want to give you an example of the amazing results that were achieved to reduce transportation emissions from the mid-90s to 2012. 5 regulations to reduce NOx and particulates have resulted to saving 40,000 premature deaths and millions of respiratory illnesses. And clearly there was a cost to the industry. It was for these 5 regulatory efforts. It cost $15 billion, but the public health benefits were close to $300 trillion. I mean, that's $1 billion, I'm sorry, like 1 to 20 cost versus benefits. Also under President Obama, we set the first greenhouse gas standards for cars and trucks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% in 2025. Programs save individuals money at the pump, save the economy about $1.7 trillion. And the Clean Car Program was probably the most important climate action that President Obama took. As you all know, unfortunately, this program is one of the programs that President Trump has rolled back. But given all the support that it gets across the country, I think we will see the Trump administration at the courts. So we live in very challenging times. Still half of Americans breathe unhealthy air. We're dealing with pandemic and the biggest challenge facing the planet, which is climate change. As I tell people, climate disruption is daily news, from devastating wildfires to record hurricanes in the East. But this is not the new norm. I wish we could all agree that this is the new norm. It's not. Extreme weather patterns will get worse. And we know science that we need to meet carbon neutrality from all sectors by 2050. And if we don't act urgently, things will get worse. And we know that the impacts of climate change worsens ozone pollution, disproportionately impacts people of color and low-income families. So we must act. I want to give you an example how we can do that if there was a political will under the Clean Air Act to address the biggest segments of the transportation sector, which is cars and commercial trucks. So to get to carbon neutral for all cars and trucks, the target should be to have all the new sales of cars in 2035 to be zero emitting. This is what California announced last week. And for commercial trucks, we need to see that new sales are zero emitting vehicles, either electric or fuel cells, by 2040. And I want to leave you with some good news that support taking action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. First, we do need new legislation. For many sectors of the economy, we may need new legislation. The Clean Air Act works perfect for cars and commercial trucks. It allows us to set technology forcing standards to transition us to electric vehicles or zero emitting vehicles. That's pretty good news. The only legislation that is needed is funding for infrastructure, stimulus money to support production of EVs, like what they're doing in Europe, what they're doing in China, and support the production of the electric vehicle components in the US to create new jobs. The other good news is that the technology is here and companies are investing towards electric vehicles. Collectively, about $300 billion is the current investment from all major car manufacturers to transition to electric vehicles. The other good news is that the cost of batteries has been dropped by 80%. And experts believe that by 2022 to 2026, we're going to have a cost parity between an electric vehicle model and the same gasoline or diesel model. So to close, we have to act, and I believe that each one can make a difference. We can make a difference in our jobs, our daily lives, voting, and having our voices heard. So with that, go back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Margo. That was, thank you for ending on a positive note. Tim, you come at this directly from the market side at Corning. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, American Lung Association and American University, for sponsoring this event. The Clean Air Act is certainly worthy of it, and we should be having a celebration like this at least every 10 years. Corning is one of the original catalytic converter companies. We date back on this product into the early 1970s. Our role is the ceramic honeycomb substrate on which the catalyst is placed. That technology is virtually on every car and truck produced today. And amazingly, it is fundamentally unchanged, but much improved, of course, from 45 years ago. Corning received the National Medal of Technology Award for the innovation during the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration. That's akin to the US version of the Nobel Prize. And perhaps more significantly, Corning helped found the trade association, MECA, Manufacturers of Emission Control Association, in the early 70s to insulate individual companies from commercial and political pressures from our customers. This allowed us to freely share the technical possibilities with regulators and NGOs to give them confidence in going tighter. This is key. Going back, when it became inevitable 50 years ago that catalytic converters will be needed, Ed Cole, who was GM's president, interrupted a much lower level Corning GM engineering meeting discussing glass to request that Corning begin developing support catalysts. We responded by knowing the certainty of the market, we responded by putting almost all of our R&D division onto the project. We were successful, and soon following this, the oxidation catalyst was on all US cars except one model in 1975. Our customers told Corning to amortize our first catalytic converter plant over 5 years or so, because engine technology will make them obsolete. Well, we know what happened. The next tightening came in 1981, again, due to the availability of the three-way catalyst. In that regard, John Mooney, who is accredited with that invention, died earlier this year. The three-way catalyst is often heralded as the greatest environmental invention ever. John Mooney received the National Medal of Technology Award the same year that Corning inventors did. After that, 1981, we went 13 years without further tightening until 1994 with the EPA Tier 1 regulation. That was spawned by the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. This 13-year gap threatened to commoditize the emission control industry, and technology stagnated. This would have been terrible if we would have held at that point, because on the technology road, we were only 10% of the way from where we started in 1975 to where we are today. We started addressing cold start emissions in 1998 with the innovative NLEV standards phase-in, followed by 6 years later, the LEV2 Tier 2 regulation that was phased in from 2004 to 2009. This resulted in an order of magnitude drop in emissions. Relative to the first catalyst in 1975, this is a 98% emissions cut using a system that's now 1/4 of the size of that one in 1975. We are now implementing LEV3 and Tier 3, which is another 80 or 90% cut on top of that. Shifting very briefly into heavy duty, US heavy duty started their catalyst-driven emission technology in 2007. This was 32 years after light duty. However, very quickly, in 2010 roughly, the heavy duty sector was at parity on a total energy basis coming from the engine with the light duty. They're emitting the same amount of emissions per kilowatt hour of energy. This was a monumental task for the heavy duty industry, achieving 90% NOx reductions. After 10 years, only 10 years, those systems are approaching half the size that they were back then and removing twice as much more pollution at a much reduced cost, while still enabling fuel reductions through higher engine out NOx calibrations. Today, technology is available to make engines exceptionally clean. I'm going to make a very profound statement. We have evidence, in fact, Honda developed an emission control system in the late 1990s that was negative emission, not zero emission, negative emission. The tailpipe was cleaner than the ambient air, meaning that the more you drive the vehicle, the cleaner the air gets. This is not hypothetical. This is happening today with particulate filters, the diesel particulate filters. In almost any environment, they act like vacuum cleaners, cleaning the air of particulate. Today, the biggest gap to be filled in the US today is with gasoline particulate filters. Instead of leading, we are way behind Europe and even China, where the same cars as in the US emit 1% of toxic ultrafine emissions. The same cars sold in China and the US, the Chinese cars are 98% cleaner on the very toxic ultrafine particles. With this exception, advanced regulations gave the US a head start on technology. For example, a full 20 years after they were first implemented, there's hardly no Chinese competition on DPFs and advanced substrates due to continuous improvements. Thank you very much for allowing me to make these comments, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Tim, for walking us through that history. Next, we have Tommy Wells to give us a local perspective on the work he's doing to tackle air pollution.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. Thank you to the American Lung Association, especially to one of my favorite groups in Washington, D.C., the School of Public Affairs at American University, and a special shout out to my long-term friend, John Reeder, who we met working on implementing and supporting the Clean Waters, or the Clean Water Act. So here we are on air. Now, D.C. is more hyper-local. While we're larger than 2 other states in population, we're a small landmass, and we don't generate electricity through coal plants or gas-fired plants. We're a consumer. So in looking at DC more as what is our role, there's a couple of things that are, again, more on the consumer side, but also a little bit more on the hyper-local side. First is when we received the allotment of our VW money for addressing their cheating around NOx gases and such, we came up with a plan of how we were going to spend it. Really, we used health as the guiding principle for how we would spend it. And so we looked and found that there was an area in DC where we had a disproportionate number of children with asthma, and the areas along the Amtrak corridor is where they park the trains. And if you're familiar with switchers, switchers are the old trains that didn't die, the old engines, and they keep using them to move 24 hours to move the trains around. And so even though the newer engines that they use that are 30 years old are not as polluting as these that are 50 plus years old. And so we decided that one thing that we needed to do with the Amtrak funds is to invest and help support Amtrak with changing out the switchers. And so it may be delayed because Amtrak has lost a lot of money during COVID, but that's where the initial investment goes, is to change out switchers, which has a disproportion on health of low income neighborhoods. The other area is that we have a local bus line besides just our WMATA bus line, Metro. So we have a local bus line that's taking more and more local routes over, and that's called the circulator. And what we're doing is that we're changing out the circulator and using the funds from the VW settlement money to where when you have to buy a new bus, that we'll pay the difference with the VW money for that to be an electric bus. And also we're working with them as the Department of Energy and Environment to help permit and locate places for charging the buses, which obviously in a denser city, built out city, is a challenge for us, but we're moving forward. For a while, we had the largest electric bus fleet in the US for any city, but now, of course, LA and Philadelphia have surpassed us, but we're going to continue to add to our electric bus fleet. The other way, and I think that it's important to note the role of regulation, but the other way that a city like ours, as a consumer of energy, will be trying to make a difference, is that we passed the first building energy performance standards in the nation. And what that means is that you can have green building codes, you can have new codes for new construction and renovation of large buildings, but how do you get at the current building stock? And so what we have in terms of our Clean Energy DC Omnibus Bill, which we passed 2 years ago, is that it recognizes the fact that 74% of all the greenhouse gases caused, attributable to Washington, D.C. is from our built environment, from our buildings. So it is going to require building energy performance standards of current buildings. And it starts with the larger ones, then it gets smaller and smaller as we implement. And they'll have to meet these marks. And one of the important things about it is that it goes, on compliance with the building owners, that often costs get passed through to the tenants, but in this case, the building owners will be fined. And the fines, we're just finalizing the fines, will be substantial. So there'll be plenty of incentive to change the buildings over to using less energy. The other part is that we've got a goal that's in law that all of the energy purchased for DC, at least the electricity, be from have a renewable portfolio standard by 2032. Now we want to cut our greenhouse or our fossil fuels our carbon budget by 50% by 2032 to be carbon neutral, which the mayor has declared by 2050. But the first place that we're entering the market as a consumer is that we're requiring a certain amount of the energy that any of the users use must come from a renewable portfolio, so that it's a portion of that. We also have a law that says we're to get 10% of our energy that the city, the whole city, everyone that's here uses, generated from solar energy by 2035. And that's going to be an incredible challenge. Obviously, if you think about it, it's not so much of how much energy or the pie that solar will be generated from within the city, but it also includes how much you shrink the pie so that piece gets larger on its own. We just are cutting the ribbon on a 2.5 megawatt brownfield in the south part of the city that will cut and be used as a community renewable energy, a CREF, that there will be subscribers of low-income residents throughout the city to where it will help cut the power bills in half for 750 residents in one of the poorest areas in DC. So we're putting a social equity overlay to the aspirational bills that we pass to get cleaner energy and do better. Now, 24% of our greenhouse gases are caused by vehicles that come into the city. And so while we've certainly put more initiatives in place to try to get people onto public transit, and also we're looking at how we're going to convert to electric vehicles, low emission vehicles. That's a challenge in that most of the people that drive into the city don't live in the city. And so we're looking at London and other areas where they have apportioned their rights of way and their arterial roads in a way that will support and encourage low emission vehicles and hopefully electric vehicles. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing at a more local level. We the only air quality standard we don't meet 100% of the time is ozone, and 90% of what causes the ozone is from outside of the District of Columbia. We have very little control of it, and that's why leveraging our ability as a consumer will make a difference. Last thing I'll say is that the city has for the city buildings itself, we supply about 1/3 of our energy for city buildings from a 20-year contract with Iberdrola, which is a wind farm in Pennsylvania. And that by doing a 20-year contract, it allowed them to help pay their capital costs. And it also begins to have, obviously, the city be less of a cause for greenhouse gases. And that's the way we do it on a more hyper-local level. And your nation's capital trying to provide leadership where we don't have leadership down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, our neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. The questions are coming in, but I want to pick up on that thread, which you just outlined a lot of really impressive work that DC is doing. But this is a question to kind of all the panelists, and we can start with David and go all the way through, which is, you outlined this role of innovation, creating markets, and obviously a lot of that has some certainty in where those federal regulations are coming from. So we have not seen, we've seen a failed kind of federal leadership over the past 4 years, and I'd like you all to comment on what that does to the market generating component of the Clean Air Act, and even how it affects global competition and state and local ability to act. David, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yes, one of the problems with administratively set rules is that a new administration can undo rules and interfere with progress, and that's certainly happening in the current administration with many rules, including the greenhouse gas rules. But the arc of history is toward better and better performance, and anyone in industry with a long lead time that assumes that we aren't going to continue to drive for better and better pollution reduction programs is making a big strategic mistake. And we're seeing that many players in industry are smart enough. Unfortunately, they, in the absence of clear standards, they're just not motivated enough. The motivation these days is coming more from the investor community than it is from the government. And thank goodness someone is astute and understands where we're heading, even if the federal government does not. But just another point, the power of the United States in terms of world leadership is enormous. We embarked on taking lead out of gasoline. Now the entire world has taken lead out of gasoline. We started the catalyst movement on motor vehicles, and now the entire world it makes motor vehicles which are orders of magnitude cleaner than they were when the 1970 Clean Air Act was enacted. So the U.S. can be a model. It's very important to recognize that advocates in other countries are given a huge leg up when they can say, the United States has done this, it is doing this, and it's doing this without harming the economy. In fact, the benefits in health and otherwise are enormous. The United States has proved we can do this here too. So that's a big gift that the United States can give to the rest of the world, and one hopes that very soon we'll be back on track.
Margo, did you want to build on that or add to that?
Yeah, well, obviously I always agree with David's statement, but let me say this, and Tim spoke about the impact that this country has had when it comes to clean technologies, and I'll speak about the transportation sector. I mean, I remember back in 2000 timeframe, we were visiting China to convince the Chinese government that they cannot incorporate more advanced catalysts in their cars unless they remove sulfur from gasoline and diesel. Guess what? That's what they did. In 2016-17 timeframe, Europe was designing the 2030 CO2 standards. Trump has just started talking about rolling back the standard. Guess what? I spoke to the legislators in Belgium, and they looked what California had done, and they adopted something similar to the California ZEV mandate, although it's not a mandate. They gave super credits for electric vehicles, where companies like Volkswagen is investing huge amount of money, and they're going to introduce electric vehicles. Maybe 40% of their sales in 2030 in Europe will be electric vehicles. And let's not really fool ourselves. A lot of these markets are global markets, especially the transportation. GM doesn't design a car for US. GM designs a car for a global market. And guess what? China is pushing a lot on electrification. They're #1 company in selling electric vehicles. Europe now is doing the same. Well, GM cannot just, and I'm using GM as an example, I'm sorry, GM, but GM cannot sit idle. And what we're seeing them investing. So the investments are taking place. The other thing I want to say though is that let's not forget, obviously that California has played a significant role to be the innovation laboratory of all these technologies. But cities are really, they can do a lot. I mean, I looked at a recent study that the International Council for Clean Transportation published, that cities, the top cities in the country, the US, are outside really of the California cities, like Seattle, Boston, New York, Pittsburgh, Austin, to mention a few. They have higher electric vehicle sales than the average city in the US. You know why? Because they have put incentives in the marketplace, anything from financial incentives to building infrastructure, to taxes, tax credits, and so forth. So cities have a very, very, very big role to play when it comes to reducing emissions, but also to push innovation. And I would leave with that.
That's great. Tim, did you want to make any comment from the competitiveness side of this question, or any
Yes,
other
of
point
course.
on?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. I alluded to one story back in the early 1970s where Corning committed nearly their whole R&D facility to developing the core of the catalytic converter, the support for the catalyst. That was done because of the certainty. 25 years later, we had the diesel opportunity in front of us. And I don't know if many of you remember, but I certainly remember back in 2000, there was the internet bust. And Corning is a maker of optical fiber. We call it the highway of the internet, the pavement of the internet. And we just about went broke. We just about went bankrupt in 2000. We laid off a big part of our company. But you know what? We invested heavily in diesel emission control based on the certainty that it was going to come and become a fruitful business. Most recently, we developed, along with other companies, the gasoline particulate filter. And again, the board of directors and our president wanted to make sure that these would be required to meet regulation. They're not going to be put on the vehicle for green marketing, although there are examples where this happened. Diesel particulate filters in the first diesel cars in Europe were not required to meet the regulation. They were basically required by the market. By the time the regulation came into play, already 70% of the light-duty diesels in Europe had diesel particulate filters. But generally speaking, the certainty of the regulation is what drives the investment in my industry.
And I'll just add that the lack of federal leadership, while appalling, it's really even worse than, I mean, we know how bad it is and they're trying to roll back things, but for jurisdictions to be able to work together, often it's the federal government that facilitates that. I went to a conference in Philadelphia that was for the Atlantic Seaboard area to talk about electrification of the corridor. And it was put on by the electric companies and also with a number of the auto manufacturers for the country. So there's a lot of people there, and we talked about how we're going to electrify the corridor together so there's certainty in driving across, connecting to our cities. There is not one person from the federal government there. There was one guy from Congress, but there was not one person from the administration in that meeting. Think about that. I mean, that's appalling. And so the second piece is, before this president came in, we often worked interactively with Department of Energy and other groups with the federal government that were looking to pilot and show best practices, and then also to share best practices and from other states, and also to invest in that. That's gone. So besides just having somewhat, it's as bad as the vacuum that they create, besides just having someone that we can sue, that we can fight back, and that we, as they try to roll things back, but the vacuum they create by just utterly leaving the field is bad and devastating as well.
Indeed. And so we have a couple of related questions about really trying to help prioritize or accelerate the electrification of heavy-duty electric vehicles broadly. There's one question to that end, but then more specifically, so I'll just ask both, and we can go to you, Tommy, from the local perspective. There was a question about how community members and organizations might influence and encourage local school districts and governments to prioritize electric school buses and help create that infrastructure that's needed to support those heavy-duty vehicles.
I think there's two things. One is obviously we think that electrifying our school buses is important and a high priority. But even before that, one of the greatest emitters, and many of you on the panel know this, are the light duty trucks. That the light duty trucks in the city is one of the highest polluting vehicles in the city, and they escape a lot of the requirements because they're light duty trucks. And so we're looking at the right now an excise tax for when you buy a vehicle in the district, of disproportionately targeting the light duty trucks that are registered in the district to not only discourage their use in the district, but also to come up with a revenue stream for helping to invest in other things. And the revenue stream won't be enough, but it certainly does begin to get at electrifying the school bus fleets. And so that is, I think that our voters, we're in an election, but certainly we have a very progressive council. Things can move faster in DC because we're a unicameral body. That's why we're able to move some of our legislation, which is pretty strong stuff, as quickly as we do. So I encourage everybody in the district to either propose model legislation from best practices, whether it be from California or Copenhagen, wherever it comes from, and then getting it in front of our council members. We have a very progressive council, much to the dismay of some folks, but we have a very progressive council that are looking to do something along these lines.
Great. Margo, did you want to take that from a higher perspective at the federal level in terms of how to prioritize that EV acceleration?
So clearly we have a good example what California did a couple of months ago, that basically approve a set of regulations that will mandate the lighter duty of the commercial truck, like the UPS, the FedEx. They're going to require that 75% of all these light duty commercial trucks will be electric by 2035, and 45% of the heavy, the big trucks off the road, to be electric. But what California is doing is really also spending a lot of effort to put incentives in the marketplace, anywhere from tax credits and tax incentives to infrastructure, which is going to be very important. And I know that at least 11 states, I believe, I don't remember, Tommy, if the district joined, but they basically said when the program is adopted fully from California, they will adopt it as well. And that would be huge, because if you look at the states that have ZEV mandates like California, they represent something like 40% of cars sold, and probably similar for trucks. So that was pretty powerful. The fact that states, as soon as California approved their program, basically said, we too, that creates a huge market. And the truth of the matter is that the heavy duty truck industry can benefit significantly from all the work that was done to reduce the cost of batteries and increase the range of batteries. So, and the other thing that we need to think about, it makes a lot of sense for trucks to be electric, because the number one issue for the trucking industry, other than the drivers, is really the cost of running those trucks. And diesel is pretty expensive when compared to electricity. So there will be huge savings. And we have seen a lot of investments. You have, startups like Nicholas. GM is putting a lot of money to support this company. You have Tesla. You have all the major truck companies investing in electrification. So we're going to hopefully, with a new president in the White House, and I don't want to get political, I can see some extraordinary efforts by a new administration to help reduce emissions from medium and heavy duty trucks by working with California, other states, Tommy and the district, to push electrification. It's going to happen. It's just, again, a matter of time. I'm glad for the states. I'm glad that Tom is supporting electrification for trucks and school buses. And by the way, we started the school bus program at EPA under Governor Whitman when she came to EPA, just a short story, she wanted to do a lot for climate change, and President George W. Bush was basically not interested to allow her to work on climate issues. So we went to her and we said, how about getting a program in place that will, basically retrofit old school buses where kids get so much pollution, even inside the bus, because it idles and outside of the bus. And we put, I think, I don't know, $13,000, don't quote me on that, or $20,000. And that started the program that is now bipartisan, has bipartisan support to basically retrofit all diesel vehicles and trucks and buses, and electrification is one of the things that also they are, even the current administration is supporting. So a lot of great things we can do. Again, states can do a lot, cities can do a lot, but clearly the federal government has a very big role to take on all this. And we in the US have given up that role from the federal government, the leadership role.
Thank you. And, in the last panel, it was mentioned, that obviously the Clean Air Act can play an important role in driving that innovation and electrification, but that there may be this gap in terms of the need for, obviously, the supportive infrastructure. So I wonder if David, or you want to start on this, or Margo, in terms of what are some of those gaps in these kind of this technology enforcing kind of regulation tool of the Clean Air Act that you see kind of in terms of advancing electrification?
Sure, I'll start. Well, clearly, infrastructure can make a huge difference. I mean, look at the interstate highway system that was started in the Eisenhower administration. That literally changed the face of America. And we can do the same thing with cleaner transportation. The private sector already is rolling out charging stations, and the battery technology is getting better. So range anxiety is moving toward being a thing of the past. But convenience of being able to recharge quickly with nearby chargers is important, and that's something that the government can facilitate by recognizing it as an investment in American mobility that is compatible with a cleaner climate, with a safer climate.
Sarah, I'd like to chime in a little bit on the infrastructure. Yeah. I've been studying battery electric vehicles now for 3 years, 100% dedicated of my time to that. And an interesting statistic that evolved was that about 70% of the new car buyers have access to private charging, either at home or at work. So the charging infrastructure, of course, is important because it removes this obstacle of just in case. Just in case I take a long trip. Just in case I can't charge my battery. But by and large, 95% of the people that have bought an electric car dismiss range anxiety almost 100%. They say that upon buying a car and using it, I have no range anxiety. So it's a rather large inflated issue, in my opinion. The infrastructure that I think is underplayed is the raw material mining infrastructure. We have plenty of resources, but what's lacking is the time it takes to develop those mining resources to provide the metals needed in the batteries. And I'll just say one anecdote. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a lithium and cobalt shortage that was spawned by about a 1% market growth of battery electric vehicles. Going from 1 to 2% caused a major constraint in lithium and cobalt. Imagine what's going to happen when we go from 10% electric vehicle penetration to maybe 12 or 15 or 20% within a short period of time. So it's that infrastructure that I think is perhaps more critical than the battery or the charging infrastructure.
Let me say a couple of things. Clearly, infrastructure is important, and everybody recognizes that. But let me tell you what is also lacking, which people are not focusing. It's public education. It's getting the public to understand the benefits of an electric vehicle. That is not happening. You know, when you look at on the other side, the disinformation that is coming from the oil industry of, you know, they're already having this big campaign of unfairness. It's unfair to drive an electric vehicle because it goes to the wealthy. I have people stopping me when I lived in Washington, DC, asking me about my electric car, how difficult it is to charge it. So collectively, including the industry, the car industries, that they're spending billions of dollars still advertising big SUVs. We need to do a better job to educate the public. So that's one thing that is absolutely missing. And we here are not the experts, but we need people with expertise at churches, schools, teachers, individuals to talk about the benefits of an electric car. We need really investments like Europe is doing and like China is doing on mega factories, you know, to go from transition from, you know, cars, gasoline cars with 10,000 parts to an electric car that has 10 parts. And those jobs have to be created in US. We can produce the batteries here. We can produce the cells that goes to the batteries. Tim is absolutely right. Invest on exploration of materials like lithium. Tesla has made that commitment. Get away from cobalt, because we know what happens in Congo with young, you know, children are mining. We have to extend the taxes, the federal taxes. We have to really try to implement a program like what, you know, Senator Schumer has proposed, which really will allow to buy older cars much more so in bigger quantities than President Obama's program from the road, and also target communities of color and communities of low income. So there is a lot that can be done. But a lot has also been accomplished. I mean, let's, again, you know, we just need to transition much faster to electric vehicles than we have done today, which is only about 2.2% of the global sales are electric cars. China #1, Europe #2, and US #3. So with the right policies at the state, at the federal, state, and local level, we can see this transition happening faster than it's happening today.
We had a question that I want to make sure we get to from the audience, which actually gets at this electrification issue, which is the paradigm of setting technology neutral performance standards. You all noted has been the successful way of driving inspiring innovation. And the commenter notes that several jurisdictions, you know, including California, have suggested these technology mandates that would restrict certain types of vehicles. So the question is there a role for performance-based standards to address air quality and climate change?
Let me say this, under the Clean Air Act, let's assume that the future president is President Biden, and he decides to transition cars, gasoline cars, to electric cars, let's say by 2035 or 2040. Under the Clean Air Act, which is a performance-based, you know, statute, based on modeling and based on cost effectiveness and other analysis that EPA has to do, we can go to 100% electric cars in 2035 or 2040 timeframe under the Clean Air Act. We don't need a new piece of legislation. The technology forcing elements of the Clean Air Act has done that. By the way, I don't know if the audience realizes that under President Obama, it was the Clean Air Act that led the way to setting the 2025 greenhouse gas standards. And the law that NHTSA operates for the fuel economy followed. Clean Air Act is fantastic. Let me say a couple of things about it, other than technology forcing. You can go beyond 5 years in setting standards. The fuel economy statute allows NHTSA to go 5 years. You cannot set these technology forcing standards to transform the car industry into 5 years increment. You need long-term, kind of market and regulatory signals for industry to invest, because they need to invest. So that's one thing. The second thing is the Clean Air Act offers a lot of flexibilities to the car companies, which reduces the cost significantly. So these are under the Clean Air Act, you can evaluate electricity under the existing EPCA law, where the fuel economy standards are being developed. You cannot do that. So the existing Clean Air Act, that's what I said in my opening, in my remarks. The good news is that the new president can use the Clean Air Act to push electrification. However, you're going to need a lot of stimulus money, a lot of incentives to create jobs and create the manufacturing of these vehicles and their components in the US, including infrastructure, obviously.
Well, I know we could, David, do you want to get in? I was going to say,
very quickly,
I want to give everyone I wanted to give everyone like 30-second final comment you want to make so we can wrap up and give everyone a break.
So, there is a role for performance standards. There are also roles for clear design standards. And in the California case, the regulations haven't been written yet. Participants will be able to make the case for stating the standard as a zero emission standard rather than a no internal combustion engine standard. But they'll be able to make that argument, and if there's a persuasive argument, California has the authority to set the standard, either specified as zero emissions or specified as no internal combustion engine. So it's an intellectually interesting idea, I suppose, but it's not a big deal in the real world.
Tommy, do you want to? I want to give you the opportunity to lay out in 30 seconds what you're most hopeful for in the coming year under the Clean Air Act.
I think one of the things that in the previous panel they talked about land use and the disproportionate impact on low-income residents and on minorities, which is true in DC. That where we park our school buses, where we park our trains, where we have these, where we park our metro buses, has a disproportionate impact, obviously, on the air quality and the health outcomes of young people and older people in the district reflect this industrial use. That's where we put our housing. That land cost is less cost when you put it up next to industrial use. And then lower income people move there and they have, poorer health outcomes. So obviously we've looked at that in terms of where do you cite things, but the other paradigm obviously is that if those school buses, the metro buses, and the other trucks that are parked in large quantities around low income neighborhoods were electric rather than, certainly gas emitting, based on fossil fuels, that also is a way to get at equity as well. So I just don't want to lose that I know that we want to stop global warming. There's a number of things that we want to achieve through electrification, but certainly related to environmental justice in cities like DC, it is one of the tools to help really create a healthier environment for low-income residents that are having poor health outcomes.
Yes, thank you. Really important point. And Tim, the last word that you want to offer the group before we part.
Yes, thank you. I'll take the last word anytime. The Clean Air Act has been an amazing success. It took a lot of courage, took a lot of innovation, a lot of risk taking. And look at the success. Going forward, we can see the future of transportation is renewable energy on the grid driving electric vehicles. Because of the government policy in China and in Europe, they now lead the electrification arena. It wasn't too long ago, maybe 2 years ago, the US was acknowledged as having the best battery research. And that may be so right now, but I'll tell you one thing. There's a lot of very good innovation coming from China. China research on battery chemistries was discounted 3 years ago. Now it's at the forefront. China has always had the vehicle technology, the electric vehicle technology, and implemented it. And now they are taking a very rapid position on research and development. So this is a major initiative going forward. And we can sit on the sideline or we can take a lead. And a lot of that is dependent on government policy.
Well, I want to thank you all. Thank you, David, Margo, Tommy, and Tim, and all of our participants. It's been a really rich discussion. I know we could keep going. I just want to remind the audience that we'll take a break until 2:45. There'll be a slideshow in between, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Thank you.